Section 6 of Abe and Mawruss. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Abe and Mawruss. Being Further Adventures of Potash and Perlmutter by Montague Glass. Chapter 5. A Return to Arcady. Part 1. Yes, Abe, Mawruss Perlmutter said with bitter emphasis. Max Kirshner steals away trade from under our noses while you fool away your time selling goods to a fellow like Sam Green. What do you mean, fool away my time? Abe cried indignantly. Sam Green is an old customer from ours, and if Henry Feigenbaum gives for a couple of $100 in order to Max Kirshner, he only does it because he's got pity on the old man. And anyhow, Mawruss, even if Sam Green is a little slow, you understand, sooner or later we get our money, ain't it? Sure, I know, Abe. And if them sooner or later fellas would pay you once in a while sooner, Abe, it'd be all right, you understand? But they don't, Abe. They always pay you later. Well, Sam has got some pretty stiff competition up there, Mawruss, Abe said. In the first place, Cyprus is too near Syracuse, you understand? And if one of them yokels wants to buy for $30 a garment for his wife, if he's up to date, he goes to Syracuse. And if he's a back number, he goes to Sam's competitors. What's the name now? Van Buskirk and Patterson. Yes, Mawruss, back numbers. Always buys from back numbers. Why don't we sell that Van Buster concern our line, Abe? A fine chance I got it with them people, Mawruss, Abe exclaimed. They buy their whole stock from a jobber in Buffalo. And they got an idea that Russian blouses is the latest up-to-the-minute effects and garments. And you couldn't blame 'em, Mawruss. Most of the women up in Cyprus thinks that way, too. That ain't here near there, Abe, Mawruss interrupted. Sam Green is one of them fellas which he is slow to pay, even if he'd be worth $1 million even. He's got that habit, Abe. Look what he writes us now. He handed Abe a letter which read as follows. Samuel Green, Dry Goods and Notions, the K&M Sylph-Shape Corset, Cyprus, New York, April 1, 1910. Gents, your favor of the 13th, instance mensa, received and contents noted, and in reply would say you should be so kind and wait a couple of days and I will send you a check sure. On an account I got sickness in the family and oblige. Yours truly, S. Green. Well, Mawruss, Abe commented, mindful of a recent obstinate lumbago. Might the fella did get sickness in his family, maybe? Schmooze, Abe, Mawruss cried impatiently. Every season that fella's got another excuse. Last fall his wife goes to work and has an operation. A year ago he's got his uncle in the hospital. The winter before that he's got funeral expenses on account his mother died on him. And so it goes, Abe. That fellow would a damn sight sooner kill off his whole family, you understand, than pay a bill to the date is due. All right, Abe said. Then we wouldn't sell him no more, that's all. Mawruss shrugged. That's all, he repeated. A concern don't pay strictly to the day, so he couldn't sell him no more. And that's all, socked air. For a fellow which he's losing customers right and left to a back number like Max Kirshner, Abe, you're talking pretty independent. Say, looky here, Mawruss, Abe exploded. I just told it you. Max Kirshner only gets that order from Henry Feigenbaum because he takes pity on him. What do you mean pity? Mawruss retorted. I seen Max Kirshner in the subway this morning, and he looks like he needs pity, Abe. He's got diamonds stuck on him like a pawnbroker's widow. That's all right, Mawruss, Abe continued. Some drummers has got diamonds, and some has got bank accounts. But there's mighty few got both, Mawruss. And Max Kirshner ain't one of them. One thing you got to remember, Mawruss, Max is an old man. What are you talking nonsense, an old man? Mawruss exclaimed. Max has just turned 60. Sure, I know, Abe commented. And for a drummer, that's awful old, Mawruss. A fellow which he spends 6 months out of the year in trains and hotels, Mawruss, has got to be mighty particular about what he eats. I stopped in one hotel together with Max shown many times already. And at dinner, I'm always eating steaks, and once in a while eggs maybe. But Max goes for them French names every time. Many a night I watch Max in a hotel lobby, and you can see by his face that his stomach is boiling. Never mind, Abe. I could stand a little indigestion too, Abe. If I would be getting the orders, Max is getting it. That's a thing of the past, Morris, Abe replied. Business falls off something terrible with him, Morris, and the first thing you know, Morris, Klinger and Klein gets rid of him, and then Diamonds would gotta come in handy before he finds another job. Yeah, Klinger and Klein would get rid of him, Morris cried skeptically. Max Kirschner ain't no ordinary drummer, Abe. There's a fella he was born and raised on this side. He's a gentleman, Abe, and them boys respect him. Besides, Abe, he practically started them two greenhorns in business. 20 years ago, when them boys was new beginners, Kirschner brings him in good trade, you understand? And not only that, Abe, if it would be for him, them fellows wouldn't never lasted 6 months. The first season, they turned out a lot of stickers. When they get short, Max goes himself to Old Man Baum and gets him to lend them boys $1,000. People don't forget such things in a hurry, Abe. Don't they, Morris? Abe rejoined. Well, maybe they do and maybe they don't, Morris, but 20 years ago is a long time to remember things, Morris. And when a fellow draws big wages like Max Kirschner, he's got to turn in the orders, Morris. Otherwise, past favors is nix. Morris nodded. That's no lie either, Abe, he said, rising to his feet. And we should right away send Sam Green a letter. Either he should mail us a check or we should put his account on a collection agency. That fella goes too far, Abe. It was precisely a week later that Max Kirschner's relations with the firm of Klinger and Klein finally reached their climax. Yes, Morris, Abe said as he entered the showroom, after a brief visit to the barber shop that morning. What did I told you? You didn't tell me nothing, Abe, Morris retorted. And besides, it was my idea that we wrote him a rotten letter. Otherwise, we would wait for another week or 10 days for our check. As it is, Abe, he deducts $4 on us for a damage on account of bum packing. He's not only a crook, Abe, but a liar also. $4 wouldn't break us, Morris, Abe rejoined, and we could easy make it up on the next bill he buys from us. But I wasn't talking about Sam Green at all. I mean Max Kirschner. I ain't much bother my head about Kirschner, Morris said. Let Klinger and Klein worry about him. Abe grunted as he removed his hat and coat. You'd wait an awful long time for Klinger and Klein to worry about him, Morris, he said, because them fellas got such hearts, which got so hurtin', their wives would die together with their children in one day yet. I'm only saying, you understand, them two suckers wouldn't worry neither. Saturday night, they fired Max Kirschner like a dog, Morris. And why? Because a week ago, Max eats some shtuss in Bridgetown, you understand, which he's sick in bed for 3 days. And while he's laid up yet, Samet Brothers cops out $1,000 order on him. Oi, Gewalt, Morris cried with ready sympathy. You don't tell me. And now that poor fellow walks the streets looking for a job. And a fine show he's got it, an old man like him. Don't say that again, Abe, Morris said. You Jonah the fella that way. Somebody hears you saying Max is an old man, and the first thing you know, Abe, they believe he's old. I told you before, Max is only 60. And when my grossvater Selig was 60, he got married for the 3rd time yet. Sure, I know, Morris, Abe retorted. Some fellas get married for a wife and some for a nurse, Morris. Any cripple could get married, you understand, but a fella must gotta have his health to sell goods. He seized the current issue of the Daily Cloak and Suit Record, and as he sat down to examine it, he heaved a sigh, which merged into an agonized groan. Oy, he exclaimed, that lumbago still gets me in the back. You see, Abe, Morris commented maliciously, he ain't so young yourself. From 48 to 60 ain't 1,000 years neither, Abe. Abe scowled, and then his face lightened up in the conception of a happy idea. I give you right about that, Morris, he said. But with me it's different, Morris. If I get so I couldn't go out on the road, you understand, we could always hire someone to go out for us. Could we? Morris grumbled. Sure, Abe went on. And even today yet, while I'm making Denver and the coast towns, it wouldn't harm us we should get a fella which is acquainted with the trade up the state in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Wouldn't it? Morris croaked. We're losing everyday business, Morris, because I got such a big territory to cover, Abe said. A fella in a small town wants his fall goods early, just so much as one of them big concerns in Denver or to Seattle. and if I don't show up in time, they place their orders with someone else. Whereas, Morris, if we could wait a couple of weeks, we would say, for instance, until he finds out that everyone ain't paying fancy salaries like Klinger and Klein, you understand? For a couple of $1,000 a year, Morris, we could get Max Kirschner. And Max Kirschner, Morris yelled. What do you mean, Max Kirschner? Yes, Morris, Abe said, we could get Max Kirschner. And even if he would be a little crunkly once in a while, sometimes maybe he would be worth to us $2,000 a year anyhow. $2,000 a year, Morris bellowed. What the devil are you talking nonsense, Abe? We should give $2,000 a year to a cripple like Kirschner? Or do you think you're running here anyhow, a cloak and suit business or a home for the aged? If you want to give charity, do it with your money, not mine. For the remainder of the forenoon, Morris Perlmutter moved about the showroom with his face distorted, in so gloomy a scowl that to Abe it seemed as though a fog enveloped his partner, through which there darted, like flashes of heat lightning, exclamations of "Schnorrer," "Cripple," "With my money yet," and "Crust that fella got it." At length he put on his hat and went out to lunch, while Abe gazed after him in mute disgust. When some people talks charity, he grumbled, you gotta reckon 100% discount for cash. You see, Abe, Morris cried as he came in from lunch, how easy it is to misjudge people. I just seen Saul Klinger over to Hammersmith's, and he tells me that in 6 weeks yet Max Kirschner falls down on 3 orders. $4,000, that sucker. Leon Samek hops out on him, and Saul couldn't help himself, Abe. Either they gotta fire Max or they go out of business. Abe nodded slowly. His face possessed an unusual pallor, and he clenched an unlighted cigar between his teeth. What is it? Morris asked. Don't you feel good? I'm feeling fine, Morris, he replied huskily. I could blow myself to a bottle of champagne wine yet, I feel so good. I'm enjoying myself, Morris, on account Mo Griesman from Syracuse was just in here, which he tells me his nephew, Mozart Rabiner, goes to work for Klinger and Klein as a drummer, and we should be so good and cancel the order which he gives us yesterday, as blood is redder as water, and what the devil could we do about it anyway? Morris's jaw dropped, and he sat down heavily in the nearest chair. One thing I'm glad, Morris, Abe said as he put on his hat. I'm glad if we got to lose Mo Griesman's trade, Morris, that he's going to give it to a fellow like Saul Klinger, which he's such a good friend to you, Morris, and got such a big heart. He jammed his hat on his ears and started out. Where you going, Abe? Morris asked. I'm going over to Hammersmith's, Morris, he replied, to get a bite to eat, and I hope to see Saul Klinger there, Morris, as I would like to congratulate him, Morris, with a pressing iron. Morris's face settled once more into a deep frown as the elevator door closed behind his partner. Always with his mouth, he's making somebody a blue eye, he muttered as he turned to sorting over the sample line against Abe's impending trip to the small towns up the state. He had picked out 4 cheap, showy garments when the elevator door clanged again, and a visitor entered, bearing a brown paper parcel. Well, Morris, he said, what's the good word? The newcomer's cheery greeting was strangely at variance with his manner, which was as diffident as that of a village dog on the 4th of July. As he advanced toward the showroom, he exhaled the odor of mothballs, characteristic of an old stock of cloaks and suits, so that before he looked up, Morris was able to identify his visitor. Hello, Sam, he said. When'd you get in? 12 o'clock, Sam replied. I would have got sooner, but a crook of a scalper in Syracuse sells me a ticket which it's punched out as far as Canandaigua. And if it wouldn't be I paid $4 extra, I come pretty near getting kicked off the train. You ain't nothing out, Sam, Morris said, because that's just the amount you're doing me for on our last bill. Doing you for? Sam cried. What do you mean, doing you for? One garment was damaged in the packaging, which I deducted the $4, and if you wouldn't believe me, here it is now. He unwrapped the brown paper parcel and disclosed a crumpled article of women's apparel, which Morris shook out and examined critically. "In the first place, Sam," he commented, "the garment has been worn." "What are you talking nonsense, worn?" Sam protested. "Once. Only my Leia put it on to see the damage. There it is." Sam pointed with his finger, and Morris looked at the spot indicated. "Well, how could that be damaged in packaging, Sam?" Morris said indignantly. "That's a stain from a loction soup." "My wife must got to eat like any other woman," Sam exclaimed indignantly. "And besides, Morris, the stain ain't all soup. You understand? Some of it gets wet in the packing case." "Well, I wouldn't bother my head about it no more," Morris retorted. "I deposited your check just now, and we're all lucky if you would deduct $4 that we got our money at all." "Maybe you are, maybe you ain't, Morris," Sam commented. "That's what I come down to see you about." "What do you mean?" Morris cried. "I mean," said Sam in husky tones, "I don't know whether the check is good at all. When I mailed it you, I got a little balance at my bank, but yesterday afternoon the president sends for me and shuts down on my accommodation, and maybe, I don't know whether he did or not, you understand, he takes my balance on account." Morris laid down the garment and fixed his visitor with an angry glare. "So," he exploded, "you're going to fail on us." Sam disclaimed it indignantly. "What do you think I am?" he demanded. "A crook? And besides, I ain't got nothing to fail with." Morris drew forward a chair. Sam sat down, and leaning back, he nursed his cheek with his hand in an attitude of utter dejection. "Well, what are you going to do?" Morris asked. "That's what I come down here to find out," Sam replied. Then ensued a silence of several minutes, during which Morris gazed attentively at his customer. "The fact is, Sam," he said at last, "you ain't got no head." Sam nodded sadly. "You're a fool, Sam," Morris went on in kindly accents, "and no matter how hard a fool would work, he's a poor man all his life." Sam deemed it hardly worth while to acquiesce in this statement, but he endorsed it unconsciously with a large tear, which stole put of the corner of his eye and worked a clean groove down one travel-stained cheek. "Have a smoke, Sam," Morris added hastily as he thrust a cigar toward his late customer. "Did you get your lunch yet? No? Come on out with me now, and we'll have a little bite to eat." He jumped to his feet and seized his hat. "Nathan," he bawled to the shipping clerk, "tell Mr. Potash I'm going out with a customer, and I'll be back when I'm here." Max Kirschner had reached the age of 60 without making a single enemy save his stomach, which at length ungratefully rejected all the rich favors that Max had bestowed on it so long and so generously. Indeed, he was reduced to a diet of crackers and milk when Abe encountered him in Hammersmith's restaurant that September morning. "Hello, Max," Abe cried. "When did you get back? I thought you was in one of them now sanatoriums." "A sanatorium is no place for a drummer to find a job, Abe," Max replied. "A good salesman like you could find a job anywhere without much trouble, Max," Abe said cheerfully. "That's what everybody says, Abe. Meantime, I'm loafing." "Wouldn't be for long, Max," Abe rejoined, as he cast a hungry eye over Hammersmith's bill of fare. "How's that filet de who's this with asparagus tips and mushrooms?" For a brief moment, Max's eye gleamed and then grew dull again. "It's fine to put the stomach out of business, Abe," Max said. "Take the tip from one who has lost 60 pounds, 10 customers, and a good job all in 6 weeks, and ordered the poached eggs on toast." Abe compromised on boiled beef with horseradish sauce, and when he was well into the noisy consumption of that simple dish, he broached the subject of Max's future plans. "When do you think you'll go to work again, Max?" he asked. Max shrugged expressively. "I'm not a prophet, Abe. I'm a salesman," he said. Well, there ain't no particular hurry, Max. It ain't the same like you had got a family to look out for. I've been a drummer all my life, Abe, Max declared, and a drummer has no right to be married. When I was a kid, I had a chance to go into the store of a couple of yokels upstate in the town where I was born and raised, and I guess if I'd done so, I'd been married and had a whole family of children by now. Maybe you're just as well off, Max, Abe said consolingly. Children is a gamble anyhow, Max. The boys is assets and the girls is liabilities, and if you got a large family of girls, you're practically bankrupt no matter how good business would be. Don't you believe it, Abe, Max said. Those two yokels both had big families, and they didn't do such a big business either, but they managed to make a good living, and last week I hear they sold out to some city dry goods man for $40,000. Abe paused with a loaded knife in midair. $40,000 between two ain't much, Max, he said. It's more than I got anyhow, Max rejoined as he rose to his feet. You got lots of time to make money, Max, Abe concluded. Come round and see us when you get time, won't you? Max nodded. As he walked down the street to make a further canvass of the garment trade, he passed the broad windows of the dairy lunchroom, where Morris was regaling Sam Green with a popular price meal. Yes, Sam, Morris said as he caught sight of Max Kirshner's dejected figure. You're lucky when you consider some people. You're still a young man, and it ain't too late for you to start as a new beginner somewhere. A young man could always make a living anyhow. Sure, Sam agreed. But why should I start in as a new beginner, Morris? I already got an established business. You understand? If I could get a fellow with a headpiece, Morris, never mind he ain't got so much money, with a couple of $1,000, we could run that fellow from Syracuse out of town. What fellow from Syracuse? Morris asked. Ain't I told you? Sam continued. I thought I says that the reason the bank shuts down on me is a fellow from Syracuse. Buys out them two suckers, Van Buskirk and Patterson. He's going to operate the store as a branch house. Morris nodded his head slowly. So, Sam, he said, you're up against one of them sharks from Syracuse. I'm afraid you got a dead proposition in that store of yours. 2 cups of coffee had revived Sam Green's ambition, however, and he laughed aloud. You don't understand them people up in Cyprus, Morris, he said. Strangers they don't like at all, and even me, though I lived in that town 10 years, most of them wouldn't buy goods off of me because Van Buskirk and Patterson is born and raised in that town, and they dealt with him ever since they was boys together. So you see, I got 10 years start on that fellow from Syracuse, Morris. If I can get some fella which he knows the garment business to go as partners together with me and to put a little money into the store, we could yet do a good business there. How much money would you got to have? Morris asked. $2,000 anyhow, Sam replied. Morris tapped the table with his right index finger and frowned reflectively. The necktie pin alone must be worth $1,000, he murmured almost to himself. And 2 rings he got it, which I know about, must stand him in anyhow $1,000 more. He thrust back his chair and rose to his feet. All right, Sam, he said aloud. You got a little egg on your chin. Wipe it off, and we'll go back to the store. I got an idea. On second thought, Sam, Morris said, as they approached Potash and Perlmutter's place of business, I wouldn't go up with me if I was you, on account I don't want to say nothing to my partner just yet a while. Where you staying, Sam? I got a room at a hotel over on 3rd Avenue, Sam replied. 3rd Avenue, Morris exclaimed. That's a Nachbarschaft for a businessman. He handed Sam a $5 bill. Go and get yourself a room at the Prince Clarence, Morris said. I'll be over there presently. Nathan, the shipping clerk, was alone in the showroom when Morris entered. Ain't my partner come back yet, Nathan? He demanded. Nathan shook his head. Then tell him when he does come back that I went up to the Prince Clarence to see a customer, Morris continued. And if he asks what name, tell him it's new concern, just starting. 5 minutes later, he visited the business premises of Kleinman and Ellenbogen, impelled thereto by a process of reasoning which involved the following points. Klinger and Klein manufactured a medium-priced line, and so did Kleiman and Ellenbogen. Klinger and Klein's leader was the girl in the airship gown, a title suggested by the syndicate's popular musical comedy of that name, while Kleiman and Ellenbogen advertised their strongest garment as the girl in the motorboat, out of compliment, of course, to the equally popular musical comedy recently produced by an anti-syndicated manager. Both concerns catered to the same class of trade, and when either of the partners of Klinger and Klein referred in conversation to a member of the firm of Kleiman and Ellenbogen, or vice versa, sucker was the mildest epithet employed. Hence, Morris Perlmutter argued that Max Kirschner would resort to Kleiman and Ellenbogen's loft for comfort and advice. As he stepped out of the elevator, his surmise was confirmed by a nimbus emanating from the necktie of a person seated at the far end of the showroom. "Hello, Max," Morris cried. "Who'd thought of seeing you here?" Max rose to his feet and extended his right hand in greeting, whereas Morris noted that the 4-carat diamond still sparkled on Max's finger. "I just left your partner over at Hammersmith's, Morris," Max said. "Sure, I know," Morris rejoined. "That fella makes a god out of his stomach, Max, but it ain't here nor there. Did you get something to do yet, Max?" "I've got a whole lot to do trying to find a job, Morris, if that's what you mean," Max replied. Morris glanced around the showroom, but both Kleiman and Ellenbogen were absent. "Where are they?" Morris asked. "Out to lunch, I guess," Max replied. "Good!" Morris exclaimed. "Them suckers would like to know everybody's business. You got a few minutes' time, Max?" "Nothing but time," Max replied sadly. "Then come uptown a few blocks with me," Morris said. "I got a proposition to make you." Max shrugged his shoulders and put on his hat. "Yes, Max," Morris continued as they walked toward the Prince Clarence Hotel, "I got a proposition to make you. But first I would like to ask you a question." "Fire away," Max said. "What had you done with that other diamond ring which you used to wear, the big one?" "I have it home," Max replied. "What do you want to know for?" "I want to lend you some money on it," Morris went on calmly. "Also that pin which you got it and that there ring. I want to lend you $3,000 on them." $3,000? Max exclaimed. "Why, the whole outfit isn't worth two." "What do I care?" Morris rejoined. "It's only a loan, and I bet you'd quick pay me back." Max paused on the sidewalk and stared. "What's the matter, Morris? Are you sick?" "Must a fella got to be sick to want to help you out, Max?" Morris said. "And anyhow, Max, it's as much a favor to us as it is to you." By this time they had reached the Prince Clarence Hotel, and Morris led the way to the cafe. "Say, looky here, Max, the whole thing is this," he said after they were seated. "I'm going to lend you $3,000 to go into business with a fellow which he got a store in a small town upstate, and you're going to do it." Max shook his head. "No, I ain't," he answered. "I'm too old a dog to learn new tricks." "If you sell good wholesale, you could sell 'em retail," Morris declared. "So if you listen to me, I'll tell you what the proposition is." Forthwith, Morris unfolded to Max the history of Sam Green's mercantile establishment. "And now, after all them years, Max," he concluded, "that fella gets practically run out of town because his bank shuts down on him." "What's the name of the place?" Max asked. "The name of the place?" Morris repeated. "Yes," Max said. "The name of the town where the fellow comes from." Morris scratched his head for a minute. "I should remember the name of every little one-horse town we got customers," he said. "The name of the place don't matter, Max. It's got 2,000 people living in it and practically only one store, because the way Sam Green is running his business now, you couldn't call it a store at all." Max rose from the table. "I'll tell you the truth, Morris," he said. "What's the use wasting our time? The proposition ain't attractive. I was born and raised in a one-horse town upstate, and even though I ain't been back for 20 years, I know what it's like. You'll have to excuse me." "But, Max," Morris commenced. "I needn't tell you that I'm more than grateful to you, Morris," Max concluded. "And if ever I want to dispose of my diamonds, you shall have first chance." He shook Morris's limp and unresisting hand and returned at once to the showroom of Kleiman and Ellenbogen. "Anyone come for me, Miss Cashman?" he asked the bookkeeper, who was busily engaged in the preparation of the firm's monthly statement. "Say, looky here, Kirschner," Louis Kleinman called from his office. "Leave the girl alone, can't you? She's got enough to do tending to our business." "I'm only asking her if she has any word for me," Max replied. "I don't care what you're asking her," Kleinman said, as he came out of his office to confront Max. "You are acting altogether too fresh around here, Kirschner. You pay rent here or what?" Max made no reply. "And furthermore," Kleinman continued, "we got business to attend here, Kirschner, and we couldn't afford to have no dead ones hanging around." For a brief interval he scowled at Max, who turned on his heel and made for the elevator without another word. His applications for employment during the past few days had met with polite refusals, coupled with cheerful prophecies of his early employment. To be sure, Max had taken little stock in this consoling optimism, but it had all helped to keep alive his spirits, which had sunk again to their lowest ebb at Kleiman's epithet, "dead one." After all, he was a dead one, he reflected, as he stumbled along the sidewalk toward his boarding house on Irving Place. A man of 60, safely entrenched in his own business, with the confidence his wealth inspires, is in the very prime of his life. But Max, with his health impaired and his employment taken away from him, felt and looked a decrepit old man as he tottered upstairs to his third-floor room and flung himself on the bed, where he lay for more than an hour staring at the ceiling. During that interval he reviewed his career from the time he helped his father, a Prussian refugee of 1848, in the little country store upstate. Then came his father's death, followed by a clerkship in the large dry goods business of his father's competitors. After this he had moved to New York, and from that time on he had followed the calling of a traveling salesman with varying success, until at 60 he found himself out of health and employment, with property of less than $2,000 as a reserve fund. What a fool he had been not to accept Perlmutter's offer. Nevertheless, it seemed futile for a man of 60 to make a new start in a strange town, especially since in rural communities business goes as much by favor and friendship as by commercial enterprise. Now, had he been offered a partnership in a store in his native town, where it would be an easy matter to renew old acquaintance, he might have viewed the proposition differently. He rose from the bed and sat down in an armchair, while his mind reverted to more pleasant topics. He pictured to himself his father's store, underneath what the townspeople called the Opera House. He saw again that dingy little hall with its small proscenium opening guarded by a frayed old curtain, and he smiled as he remembered the landscape it bore. With the sophistication of his race, he had enjoyed many a good laugh at the performance that had evoked the tears of his fellow townsmen. What rubes they were, to be sure, and yet what good fellows the boys had been. He recalled various ones by name, and found himself wondering how they looked and whether they were married or single. Another half an hour of like musing, and suddenly he slapped his thigh. "By Jinks," he said, "I'll do it. I need a vacation, and I'm going to have it too." End of section 6.